I said earlier in this program, we, the Guyana National Council on Public Policy, will stand as an arch barrier and provide for a voice for the people aptly. We stand on in understanding. We will educate society as to the extent that they stand on the supply side of the sovereign state, and the political system that is supposed to deliver the governance of the country and the management of the resources stand on the supply side. And what has happened traditionally is that the political system co-opted the roles or co-opted the NGOs or these type of think tank organizations. And so they, at times, have always been acting in a very apprehensive manner and not following through. But that is not to say that anything was wrong, because you find that many of those NGOs also are controlled by a lot of political operatives. So they direct the rhetoric. They direct the narrative.
The politicians.
Right. They direct.
The political affiliations. Margaret, you had wanted to ask him about the structure of the GNCPP, the governance of the GNCPP. But perhaps this is a good time? Or?
But
yes.
Alan, before Margaret comes back in to ask the question, I'm a little concerned about the rhetoric that, my civil society organization will work any better in a society that, now you're talking about apprehension, in a society that a minister of the government gives a letter to a drug lord to allow him to bring in equipment, and then that drug lord later turns around and directs the killing of a political activist. I want to ask you whether there's apprehension when you get 7 letters from the tax chief saying you owe taxes or you haven't made taxes. I want to ask you whether you'll be apprehensive if the Guyana Power and Light Company turns off your light for absolutely no reason. You're blacklisted at the airport. The police stop you and search you for absolutely no reason. You know, and these are things that we hear people say that we are not apprehensive. But at the same time, the state has such power, or appears to have such power, that there are lots of people like you, excuse me, who come in, y'all been away, so you have a BA, you've been away, and you come back, and you think that you have the solutions. And I'm asking, what makes you less apprehensive when some of those things that I said could happen? And 2, what is the real agenda?
Yes, indeed. Thank you once again. Very, very, very good question. You know, when I came back back in 1999, and I got involved within the political system, many individuals will remember from that time I was part of the political system. I was an individual that was nominated as part of a group of individuals as a successor nominee to Desmond Hoyt. Having said that, what that had afforded me, that whole process has afforded me an opportunity not only to sort of get into all of the crevices and the crease and all aspects of the society.
You're a successor nominee to Desmond Hoyt?
Successor nominee.
I think you should say that again. I see. Okay.
I was named as a successor nominee to the late Honorable Hugh Desmond Hoyt.
Obviously, it didn't happen.
Well,
a
lot of people made that claim too, right? So they didn't work in the trenches, but they make a claim.
Well, I would say that many of my colleagues at the time would say to you that I did go in the trenches. Whether it was from Region 1 to Region 10, I really did get myself into the trenches, at the time. But that period of time has afforded me the opportunity to really get an in-depth perspective and understanding of the interplay of things within the political process. Even that process, that successor nominee process in of itself, was one in which, it sort of, sort of irked me, by how things happen and the way that the operation in of itself in that whole proceedings. And what happened in sort of studying the political system and learning what is happening, I sort of decide that I need this, my philosophy and perspective, as I was always aptly told by whether it's Desmond Hoyt or Ptolemy Reed or whomever it is, even Janet Jagan said that the type of perspective that I have on the way governance should be done, this society is not, as to use the words of one of those people, that's not how things are done here, so. That's not the way things happen here. So what I started to do was to try to find myself. I always felt that this is a system of failure. And I made the conscious decision that I'm not going to participate and subscribe to practicing the art of managing failure. So I recoiled myself and depoliticized myself and studied how I can contribute, because I have to contribute. I am obligated to contribute. So I spend that time from 2002 onwards until now, depoliticize myself and studying the best way in which I can contribute to bring about the necessary change that must be have in order to change, put the society on the course, following what we have achieved from our founding parents, the Jagans, the Burnhams, and all of those, to put it on the right course. And what I realize is that what is lacking as you look around within the global sphere is that we sort of looked at, we went from a colonial system into a dictatorial system. Now we have what is called a cabal system, whereby it's a group of individuals within the political system who makes all the dictations, although and so you have to sort of break that up. You have to sort of call for, not only calling for it, but you have to do things deliberately to ensure that the culture and interplay within the political system itself, those dynamics are changes. Many people will say, well, it's very bold. You think that the way that these individuals operate, whether or not you think that you can do this or not. I think that I fully understand graciously what my role is, what my power is, what my ability is in terms of ushering in these specific change. The agenda on RICO is to create a different interplay, a different culture within the society. I am very elated at this point to see the way the shift in dynamics.
Yeah, but I'm ready to bowl now. The agenda is to change the interplay and so on. But what is broke? You're saying what is broke is that the society has failed.
The society is what GNCCPP is doing. We are going to be instituting a number of activities and specific programs. In the first place, what we're going to do is try to properly organize ourselves here in the society. And we're going to organize ourselves in the form of a think tank or a rethink tank. We are going to be establishing ourselves with a number of different program departments. These program departments that will be mirroring many of the ministries or departments or agencies that function within the governmental system that to provide for governance and management of the country. And within those structures and those systems, we will have a wide cross-sector of experts. We will also have many institutional experts also, as individual experts that will be coming out of these, working with us out of these departments as consultants. You must recognize that, when I look at the National Development Strategy It is a phenomenal piece of work, I think, in my mind. And I think that if over the last 10 years, if the government had followed the National Development Strategy without trying to work on securing and a sustained existence for a political perspective, I think if they had worked the National Development Strategy and work it well, we would have seen a different type of society as it is today. I want to mention something that I think it's also very important. If you notice, with this changing dynamics within the political system that we have at this point in time, whereby we have what is called a minority government and a majority opposition. And I want to make sure that it's very clear, because folks at this point in time, our Constitution only calls for two players within the legislature, and that is a government and an opposition. Some people seem to think that it's one political party versus two political parties. At the time that they take their oath in Parliament, it becomes one, and that's the opposition. Whether it has, they come from different splinter organizations or not. But what is very important, I think it is that you have to look and see what has happened, this shift. One of the things that has always bothered me, in the 9th Parliament, right, there were 143 pieces of legislations, right? And that's when there was a majority government and a minority parliament, right? Out of those 143 pieces of legislations, 141 were by the government that were put forward and passed. 2 of those pieces of legislations were by the AFC, one by Raphael Trotman and one by Cambridge, and they were both tailored. Now, you look at that and you see this pattern of conduct that has been existing for generations and for decades. I call it an ineptness. I specifically look at it as a violation, what they have done, the violation of the constitutional fiduciary duties or obligation and responsibility to us as a society. The opposition never delivered to us. The government used their will, not the people's will, but their will, and they ushered in 141. So what do you say to the opposition? At least if they had put forward more pieces of legislation there, and they were all tabled, it would suffice to say, yes, they have been working earnestly on behalf of the citizens of Guyana and the people. They have been upholding their constitutional fiduciary duties and responsibilities, but no, they have not. So you find now, even with this arrangement that is happening there right now, there's the same pattern of conduct seems to, although that the opposition has the wherewithal, and you can see recently by the recent litigation, right, which ought not have been within the court system. As we say in law, as a point in lemony, I will just say just very briefly this. That litigation involved what is called the concept of proportionality. The concept of proportionality is a principle primarily reserved for the people, not for the political system. It was put in place that before any political party submits its list of candidates to the Elections Commission as being ready for the elections, it must demonstrate within the list that it has a proportional compilation and representation of the Guyanese society. That's where that principle affords us as an instrument, as a tool, we the people, to make sure, to enforce that. And here it is now, and I call this is what the political system is doing. They're gaming the system. It's a concept of law, or baratare, which is even more severe. And here it is, I also hear again that, they're supposed to actually, with the budget cuts, they're also going to take a political question that is designed for the legislature they're also going to be taking that. These are the type of things, Enrico, that the political system, the opposition, there are certain things the opposition cannot do. But what they can do, they can raise these things, they can object to these things, but the government will seek to find a way to buy time, to stall time, not to let these things happen. So what civil society has to do, and will be doing through the GNCPP, we will be vigorously pursuing and ensuring that the political system does what it's supposed to do within the assembly and the legislature. Albeit, we have a present within our advocacy department, advocacy and oversight department, where we pursue certain legal actions.
Just before that,
could I just seek a clarification
yes,
here, because Dr. Thomas appears to be saying, and I think unless I misunderstood him, it is kind of misleading, that the opposition in the previous dispensation could have come with more pieces of legislation, rather than the government coming forward with 144 versus 2, you're saying, from the then opposition, the AFC party in particular. But if I'm no lawyer, I think you are, the legislative framework, the legal framework, restricts the opposition from bringing bills that will have, or legislation that will have not a drain, but will have a direct effect on the financial running of things. So any bill that will affect money, that will cause us to spend funds, will be a problem. Any member could bring a private member's bill, but it must not have an effect on funding. If I'm wrong, correct me in that regard. And why I ask that, isn't therefore this an exercise in futility if we do not correct the legislative framework in this country, in which the president, I think on Article 46, if he decides as a Commonwealth citizen, you're no longer a citizen, you're no longer a citizen. I mean, there are issues in there where the police under the Police Act Section 18 could stop and search and detain any vessel, vehicle, craft, aircraft or otherwise, and say that they're looking because they suspect you may be carrying something that is stolen. And every day I see that happening, particularly to vehicles, for people who probably don't look like me and you, and they have to pay the consequences. And I mean pay, and I don't care if anybody says that they don't pay.
Yeah, that's again, graciously, very profound, I should say, body of questions there.
I'm flattered.
With time is running out. So,
to the extent, just let me address one point out of the body of questions, and it's legislative change in the legislative framework. One of the things that the Guyana National Council on Public Policy will be pursuing is constitution reform. You know that all too well. You have participated in the last set of constitutional reform processes, and it went nowhere. For the last decade,
No, the president got 2 terms.
Well, to the extent. I think the root cause of the problem.
And we had a couple of commissions, including the ERC.
Yeah, but many of the commissions, like the Human Rights Commission and all these other commissions, were never constituted. But to the extent that the principal problem that we have in this country, it's the Constitution. And one of the first things that GNCPP will be taking on is constitution reform through a might process. Many people might say that it's a very expensive process, but with today's technology, through Twitter, Facebook, and all these other things. Citizens have an avenue and a way of making a contribution to that. And then you set the mandate. Let us, the people, set the mandate. No longer put it in the legislative process and say, this is what we want, put it in the legislative format, and let's take an election on this constitutional reform process. So one of the things that GNCPP will be pursuing is that. The other thing that we're going to do is to ensure that there's a different framework for the Elections Commission. You cannot, within this present framework on the Elections Commission, have the Elections Commission primarily managed by two of the main political parties. Okay? It's practically like unheard of. It's like the jailer, and this is with regards to the Constitution Commission and also for the Constitution. It's like the jailer going to the prisoner and say, hey, take this metal, make some keys, make sure it locks the door well, and then give me it back, right? No longer are we going to sit down and tell the legislature that you make the rules by which you'll govern us. One last point in that. Recently, as part of an advocacy litigation process for these same type of contravention of fundamental rights that grew out of the elections, I heard the principal government law enforcement officer utter the words say that we as a political parties are non-entities, and therefore we are not subject to the laws or subject to the forum. Now, it behooves me to think that the political system reeks with lawyers, right? To the extent that you are coming to me, equity requires that you have clean hands in the first place. You're coming to me and you're asking me to be the principal law enforcement officer. I am as a citizen. You have to present yourself to me during elections times and tell me what your policies are, what your programs are, how my grandmother and grand-auntie and uncle benefits, pension benefits, living wages, not just wages. What are you going to do for this? And you're telling me that you're coming to me as a non-entity, asking me to be the chief principal. Something is definitely wrong. So these are the things.
As the time flies.
I need to ask you
I know,
it's,
I wanted to introduce you and invite you.
It's interesting. I would love to know, how does one depoliticize oneself, which is what Dr. Thomas says he has done. Well, I don't think that would be another discussion. However, this whole framework of the Guyana National Council on Public Policy, it seems to be making itself out to be a supreme body under which will be on the demand side the people, and on the supply side the government, the opposition, the whole legislature, and whatever. How can you establish yourself as the supreme body? I mean, what gives you the power to do that? How do you do that?
Yes.
Who do you involve?
What has historically been, let me answer it in part this way. Historically, you've noticed there are many NGOs operating here in Guyana. The NGOs operating here in Guyana have been co-opted, as I've previously said, by political operatives or the political system. These NGOs were not mindful of the fact that the Constitution gives them certain distinctive inherent powers for which this Constitution have acceded to the United Nations, the OAS, the CARICOM, the Commonwealth, civic society charters that gives us the mandate to operate without fear and favor. Here it is. GNCPP recognizes what is entrenched within the Constitution of Guyana, the powers that emanates within